Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, brought to you by LACEr Partners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard, joining you as always for the latest edition of our weekly HR-related podcast, except today we're still HR. We're going people data, people analytics, HR analytics, if you like. And to do that, it's a duet. So I've got one of our fabulous LACErs joining me. It's Julian Holmes, who is a director at LACEr Partners and heads up our people and workforce analytics function.
Do you mind executive at LACEr Partners? Do you mind?
All right. I'll start again. It's all the same thing. Thing.
We carry on from this one. Keep going.
So, Julian, do you want to tell our listeners, because you've not been on the pod for a while, just a little bit about yourself, and let's talk a little bit about the people and analytics function. I'm going to then ask you our fundamentally different question, and then we're going to reflect on a conference that you went to, which was the HR Analytics Summit. But just a quick one for those people listening in about the people and workforce analytics function and yourself.
I suppose, like everybody in HR, it's been talked about for a long time, was HR needing to use more data and more insights to make decisions. And LACE was increasingly being asked by clients to help with that. So I came on board with a lady called Nancy, and we've been building the people analytics business within LACE. And so we do everything from helping clients with their data and their reporting through to helping people make technology decisions around people analytics, and into things like all design and strategic workforce planning. So we really cover, and skills and talent as well. So we really cover the whole range of how can we apply data and insights to help us make better people decisions and better business decisions.
We're going to talk about the HR Analytics Summit that you went to. But before we did that, the rules of this podcast, as invented by myself, are that we have to have a fundamentally different question. The question that I've got for you this week is that I've just read an interesting article online, which was of a lady who, after 57 years of living in a house in Wales, has decided to put her house up for sale. And it's an eclectic house because every room and every wall is painted with some kind of a Disney-related mural, whether that's Aladdin, whether that's Snow White, whether that's the Magic Kingdom, or even Robin Hood or Peter Pan. So my question that I'm going to ask you is, if you had to paint a mural of something in one of the walls in your house, what would it be? And I'll give you a second or two to think about that as I regale you with my story, which was I used to have a mural in my house before we renovated, just around lockdown time or just after lockdown. We had, from the previous owners, an under the sea kind of theme with sharks and lots of different aquarium. It was almost like we called it the shark room. Unfortunately, my wife hated it, even though I loved it. And so it was promptly removed as soon as we went into the renovation stage. And despite a change.org petition that I put in to my colleagues and friends, there wasn't enough signatures to stop her from taking away my mural. But Julian, what would be your mural? What would you go for?
Well, talking of refurbishment, I'm having to remove, unfortunately, previous owners of our house. Their son was really into trains. So we have a downstairs bathroom that's done out entirely like a London Underground station. And unfortunately, my younger daughter has said that has to go. So we're going to fix that. If I was to do a mural, that's my daughter. She's actually a pretty amazing artist. So I would get her to do a mural and she could choose what she wants to do, but probably get to do like a mural of Frida Kahlo or someone like that. She's a pretty amazing portrait artist. So that's what I would choose.
Well, that's a very artistic and fancy response to my, I used to have a shark wall, but...
That's me, artistic and fancy. That's me.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So let's talk about the HR Analytics Summit. Maybe just before we go into, because there were some interesting bits that we wanted to pull out from a couple of the presentations just for the listeners today to talk about. Maybe perhaps before we do that, if you can just give a little bit of a 1 minute on the conference itself, the type of people that go, how long it's been going on for, that sort of stuff.
So, I mean, there are a number of people analytics conferences around Europe and around the world, really. I think the way that I would characterize this one is it always feels to me the one with the most opportunity for people to interact with each other, actually have conversations outside the presentations. And that's why I really like to go, because whether it's having a conversation with somebody who's presented or even, just asking other people about what they're up to. There's plenty of time and opportunity, and overall it feels a bit more low-key and more relaxed. So from my perspective, it's one of the ones that I enjoy going to most. And honestly, the quality of the speakers this year was absolutely awesome. So we don't have time, unfortunately, to go into every presentation, but I mean, just congrats to everybody, because I really enjoyed all of them.
Let's delve into just a few then. If we pick just one or two or three that we went through. So one of the things that you and I were talking about just before we recorded this podcast was around some of the most interesting parts. And there was a presentation by Emily DiMartino, who is the Senior Vice President and International Chief People Officer at McDonald's. Do you want to just give a little bit of an overview as to that? And let's delve into just a few of the bits that she talked about, because I think it was some quite interesting stuff that came out from it.
What I really loved about Emily's presentation was it was really digging into how McDonald's International were using people analytics to actually directly impact business performance. So, McDonald's has always been a people business. They've always known that their teams who serve their guests are incredibly important to the outcome of the business. But particularly McDonald's International struggled. They had systems all around the world, franchisees, different data definitions, different levels of insights, different levels of analytics. So their big challenge was, we know that the data is important, but we really just need to organize ourselves to start delivering some of that value.
And it's interesting. So what were some of you talked a little bit there. So she talked a little bit about having multiple people systems. Can you talk a little bit around that and what they actually did and how they were driving it to the business outcomes, and what was their approach?
So really, they talked about sort of three main phases. So the first phase was just to agree all those data definitions, get the systems aligned, get them talking to each other. Second phase was then about consolidating all of those insights into, or that data into a single data warehouse with that consistent data. And that allowed them to start driving out some of the insights, some of the decision making. And then the third phase was to start trying to use some predictive analytics. We'd dive a little bit more into what those things were and why they were valuable to the business. So, fundamentally what McDonald's knows is that they know that where they have better employee engagement, they get much higher customer satisfaction in their restaurants. And where they have higher customer satisfaction, then they get a huge increase in the number of repeat customers they get coming back to the restaurants, and that obviously drives business performance. And one of the real challenges they have is that actually the restaurant manager job is an incredibly difficult job, because they spend a lot of their time, as I think we all know about McDonald's, they tend to have very large teams working lots of small shifts. So the whole shift management piece is incredibly challenging for them. The whole talent and recruitment piece is incredibly challenging for them. So one of the sort of big areas of focus going forward is going to be, how do we make the life of a restaurant manager, supervisor, much simpler, using things like AI, using things like predictive analytics, so that they can manage the teams in the restaurants more efficiently from a process point of view, but that also then means that they can spend much more time with them, engaging with them, working alongside their teams, showing what good customer service looks like. So it's a very virtuous circle, is that if they can improve the employee experience, if they can improve the manager experience, they can improve the customer experience. Simple as that, really. But Emily did a really great job of just providing some of the data points around that and the journey they were going on. Worth saying, I think there's something like, from memory, 750,000 employees outside America, 10,000 restaurants. It's a big old ship, right? Incredibly difficult to change. So they have been, I think Emily described it sort of like a 2 to 3 year journey to achieve that. But, just the results seem, really, really promising and really compelling.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I want to ask you about where she said that they got to on that journey. So where are they at the moment, and some of the key learnings? Before I do that, just a quick shout out. One of the things you talked about there is like McDonald's recognizing that link between customer experience and then obviously their employee experience, and leveraging data for that. Apologies, shameless plug on behalf of Julian and myself here. Julian and Kat from our team, actually in one of our previous campaigns, the Employee Experience Revolution, talked about the value of leveraging using data, people data and analytics to be able to tell your story. So there's a couple of videos that Julian and Kat have done. And we ourselves, as part of that campaign, talked about the importance of recognizing that link between delivering customer experience and how employee experience can play a big part of that, and how people data is an important part of that as well. But let's talk a little bit around that, where they're up to and some of their key learnings. I'd love to get from you, Julian, just kind of give us a snippet as to what Emily talked about in terms of where they're at now.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it was only a half-hour presentation, so I can't be forensic about it. But look, my sense is that today they are able to report much more consistently on the key metrics in terms of their employees and the managers and working in restaurants. Some of the things that we're talking about, particularly when you start getting into the area of things like, developing skills. And I have the sense perhaps some of the sort of scheduling and hiring pieces are still not fully baked yet, or rather there's still opportunity to make them even more effective. So I think they're definitely on a journey. But I think that's also going to be the case with most businesses, right? Really, what we talk about in people analytics is this idea of productization, is that rather than really just thinking about how can you create insights and better decision making, but once you're able to show that and that's of ongoing value to the business, you don't want to have to keep on doing it manually all the time, right? So if you can productize that, automate it, turning into a regular piece of insight which your business leaders are able to consume, that makes the whole of your people analytics journey much more sustainable and much more impactful.
Just a quick one, because I want to move on to the Sanofi presentation in a second. But in your experience, and maybe we don't have to talk specifically about clients that we work with, but perhaps the feeling and the vibe that you get from turning up to conferences like that, are businesses like McDonald's and where they're at their journey, are they quite advanced compared to, because I always think that's a really interesting thing when you go to conferences, like when I go to conferences, marketing conferences, and you're always looking over the fence as to, well, how far along in the journey are we at? Would you describe this as a typical further along the journey type of business, or because of the type of business they are, because of the size they are, because of the reliance that they need to have on data, and as you said, the size of that workforce, are they a little bit more advanced than the average sort of, 5, 10, 15,000 business UK operations, that sort of thing?
I suppose what I would say is that analytics is a journey, right? And there is definitely a wide spectrum, and of course it's true to say that larger businesses with more funds are generally able to do more scalable, more repeatable, more impactful people analytics. But one of the analogies I might have used before is one of the best analogies I heard is that doing people analytics is a bit like playing the piano, right? You don't start down all the low notes, low notes, we're just going to sort our data out, or the medium notes, we're just going to be good at reporting, or the high notes, we're going to be amazing at predictive analytics, or, driving business outcomes, right? So the piano sounds good when you play kind of some of your low, middle and high notes together at the same time. And that's what this is one of the points of view we share with our clients, is don't think that you absolutely need to do everything to exhaustive detail in a sort of a step ladder type way, because you might find there's something relatively simple you could do, relatively easy that you could do without a huge business impact and doesn't require a lot of sophistication. So it's really about understanding, what are the business challenges, what are the people challenges today, which ones can we address today, and what more do we need to start picking off the other things, and what's a sensible order to do it. So that's the way that I would describe it.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So you sort of update, I guess, for those organizations probably listening in there and thinking, we're not that far on our journey. It's like everyone's journey is different, obviously, isn't it? So let's talk a little bit about the Sanofi presentation, the Agile HR adapting to rapid change in the digital era. And it was Nick Hugel who presented on that. So do we want to just do maybe just a general overview of what he was talking about here, and then maybe we can talk about some of the specifics that they go into?
The overall theme to Nick's presentation was the importance of thinking about change management and making sure that your consumers, your business leaders actually knew what you were doing, but also how you led them through that journey, that they could begin to assimilate it and actually build it into their everyday decision making. That was the fundamental. And the framework he used, I think, very famous in change management, a guy called John Cotter, wrote a series of books on change management. So Nick was using that as a framework to say, look, we use this framework as we think about how we roll out our people analytics and wider workforce and business transformation initiatives. And I just thought that was incredibly helpful dare I say it, sometimes in some organizations, the analytics piece is sort of seen as more a sort of a data or a technical challenge, and less care is spent on, your stakeholder engagement, your governance, you're getting support and buy-in for what you're doing. And then really importantly, consolidating it and making it repeatable and scaling it and delivering value from it, right? So Nick did a really nice job of tying that all back to Kotter's sort of change management framework.
And they talked about this kind of idea of one Sanofi with lots of different sort of various component parts to it: transformation management, tools and resources, upskilling and learning, culture and behaviours, employee listening. Can you maybe just, obviously, you're not Nick, so you can't go into the granular detail, and as you said, a 30-minute presentation, but just for our listeners, maybe just give people a little bit of a flavour as to what he was talking about.
I think what Nick was alluding to was that Sanofi, I think, based on what Nick was saying, was very much as this joined up approach in terms of the way they think about people insights along what is going on in the business, how the business is actually transforming itself. One of my observations is sometimes you find with an organization, your expertise around things like people analytics alongside something like organization design or workforce planning, those things are done to some degree in silos, employee experience as well. And what I liked about what Nick was describing is Sanofi seeing that as an overall framework of things that they do in concert together to deliver the change and the impact the business need.
Is there any other points from that presentation? I did want to pick up on the Gen AI stuff that they're doing, because I just think, it's a bit of a buzzword. Well, it's not a buzzword. It's something that organizations are looking at regularly. And we've already done countless podcasts and live streams and written pieces on AI and its impact on HR. But perhaps if we can touch on that. But before we do that, was there anything else that you wanted to just pull out? He explained a couple of the bits that they were working on. Was there anything you wanted to pull out before we then go on to the Gen AI bit you thought was particularly interesting?
I think people are interested to hear about how sort of Nick and his colleagues have built really an engine around employee experience and employee feedback. So really trying to really up their sort of surveying game, but then it's how they process that survey data and pulse survey data using sentiment analysis. And then quite interesting, using AI to summarize that feedback so that it can be presented back to their executives in a way that's easy for them to digest and consume. Funnily enough, I was reading, I think it was a Fast Company article, not so one about actually, we think that the power of AI is in generative stuff, whereas actually a lot of the business uses that will have the biggest impact is its ability to take a large quantity of information and summarize it and turn it into something that's actually usable. And that would certainly seem to be at least a part of the strategy that Nick and team were applying in sort of Sanofi. And so what that meant was they were really able to condense this sentiment down into what they call praise and pain points. So the execs actually knew this is the stuff that we know is going well. This is stuff that's causing pain. And then perhaps, I don't think they were interested in identifying individuals or anything like that, but using also it to start to highlight different parts of the business where there was either positive or negative sentiment towards change, and where that sentiment was held either by the managers or frontline workers, basically, and then being able to get a sense of, we might need more change effort or more management in these areas of the business. Whereas these parts are actually supportive of the change and they're behind it, and therefore they're much more likely to make it happen and deliver the benefit. So I thought that was all super interesting. I would say it's not I didn't think it was the first time I'd seen it before, but it did seem, Nick did actually tell me, I was chatting afterwards, they were really clear they're working with a variety of providers around this, but they certainly weren't able to find a single holistic solution to be able to do this. And I'm personally very keen on the idea of using data as a basis to do better change management. I think that's something that overall businesses perhaps could learn from and gain benefit from.
Yeah, and it has an impact for the ability of how you deploy your resources as well, right? Because as you were saying, we've got a function over here which seem to be quite embedded with this element of change. So we don't need to spend as much time on them, as opposed to just blanket, like we have an approach. And for each of these different functions, we're going to apply the same approach. And it turns out, productively wise, it might be better if we spend more time over in this part of the business. So I think that's certainly an interesting way. And that's an interesting, how you apply AI within change management. I think some of the stuff I've heard as well around using it to augment or automate and the impact that has for businesses. So how do people react to part of their role being supported and making their life easier? So, for example, things like internal comms will help me to write these internal comms so that it's within our internal voice. That can help to upskill people quicker, as opposed to automate, which is take this job off of me. I think that's quite an interesting bit. We're going to do a podcast in a few weeks' time. We're going to get a psychologist in to talk a little bit about that. But there was another presentation, and apologies, this is where I've not done my homework as well. But you said there was another presentation that was quite interesting from a Dutch company using AI and analytics. Could we touch on some of that?
So NN, who are, forgive me, I don't know them terribly well, but I understand they're one of the Netherlands' sort of largest insurers and oldest insurers. What I loved about the NN presentation was that they have a relationship with Microsoft and with OpenAI. So they appear to have sort of quite almost like an experimental approach to deploying these technologies and seeing what benefits they can get out of them. So what we got from them, from Franca and her colleagues, was really a sense about the things where they've tried to deploy AI, the different types of model they've used, the different types of technology they've used, and what some of the benefits and also some of the pain points of using those different technologies. And they were quite detailed, which is very, very unusual. That stuff often isn't shared. So and I hope I've got this right because I'm doing this from memory rather than having a presentation in front of me, which was they were looking at, could they use a large language model, say like ChatGPT, and using different versions of ChatGPT to essentially to give HR policy advice. And they were looking at how accurate is the advice that you got back from the chatbot, and also secondly, how long did it take to respond? So, and it was, ChatGPT 4 was much better, much more reliable than ChatGPT 3. The problem was that it took 40 seconds to respond. They just went, that's just too long in terms of the human side of that. People are going to lose interest and they're not going to pay attention. Basically, it's just too slow. One of their findings from that, though, was that one of the things that they could do to really improve the quality of the responses they've got was to slightly rewrite their HR policies so it was more easy for the ChatGPT bots to read. So one of the things they found out is that if they put information in a table, it would just be ignored or misunderstood, basically. So if they wrote out in sort of prose form what was in the table, then the agents could read it. So I've always been a great believer in, I always like it when people share those sort of nuggets of detail, that pragmatic nugget, which frankly could take somebody else, would take somebody else 6 months to replicate that and reach the same finding. So I thought that was incredibly valuable and incredibly useful. Back to your point about maturity and where people are on the maturity curve, not every business is going to have either the capability to do that or the resources to do that. So from that point of view, it's always great to have these sort of trailblazers out there. But then it's back to that point I was saying before is, what can we take that based on the learnings of others and productize that and turn that into something that's scalable and repeatable for us to deliver some value? So I think I'd really encourage people to keep watching the developments in this AI space, because I think there's no doubt about it. We have clients at the moment who are deploying AI more widely. And what's happening is they're not recruiting fewer people, they're recruiting more people, but the nature of their work is changing. The skills they need, the type of people they need to recruit, and the education they need to give their people is changing. So it's definitely, people always overestimate the impact in the short term and they underestimate the impact in the long term. I think it's going to be exactly that with AI. Basically, in 20 years, we won't even recognize where we are. But probably if we're expecting our world to change immediately, we're probably being a little bit optimistic.
Yeah, I think that's a really good sort of way to frame the general thinking at the moment. And the reason why we're seeing lots of noise about it and lots of talk about, AI engineers, businesses needing to look at that. But actually, it's about processes. It's how you use the technology. It's how, as a business, you can help it to simplify tasks or improve productivity. And you move from there. We are just coming up to the end of the recording time. I just wanted to just check in to make sure, was there any other sort of final bits from the conference that you just thought might be worth us plucking out before we say our goodbyes for the day?
Sometimes people analysts, we do tend to be, some of us a bit introverted, and we tend to be perhaps, focused on the here and now and delivering, what we need to do today. And I just think, particularly for discipline like people analytics, it's just so important to get out there, find out what other people are doing. We have a little people analytics network. We're always interested in talking to people, finding out what they're doing, perhaps finding out where they're experiencing challenges, often just connecting people actually, with providers or with other clients who are wrestling with the same issues. So I think sometimes investing a bit of time in networking and that kind of thing can actually maybe save you weeks, months, years of worth of effort sometimes. So that would be my one encouragement is you don't have to go to a conference, maybe a few coffees and a glass of wine or something, whatever your preferences, can help you move the cause.
Yes, really, really fascinating stuff. Fantastic to get some insight onto what was a really, really interesting summit. And we'll obviously, there's a strategic workforce planning conference that we're also looking at as well. Julian and the team will be going along to. So we'll have some more intel and some feedback from that as well. But from myself, thank you very much, Julian, for spending half an hour with me today.
Thank you, Chris. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, really, really good. If you want to find out a little bit more about Julian's team or the work that we do, you can access that on the LACE Partners website. If you go to the Our Services and look for the People and Workforce Analytics page, there's all of the different information there on how the guys can support. We also have a really, really interesting navigator, which I know that we've talked about on our previous podcast, so I might put that in the show notes as well, because that's definitely worth checking in on and finding out a little bit more. It was Aaron and Joe from the team looked at that too. From Julian, from myself, thank you very much for checking out the latest HR on the Offensive podcast, and hopefully we'll catch you next time. Thank you very much. Bye.